Francis Fontenelle, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance, Economic Development and the Youth Economy. Ms. Gemma Lafayette, Head of Research and Policy in the Ministry of Finance. Mr. Kelly Mitchell, Head of Marketing, Massey Stores, Massey St. Lucia, I should say. Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Commerce, Manufacturing, Business Development, Cooperatives and Consumer Affairs, Ms. Sophia Henry. Senior staff of the Ministry of Commerce, members of the Chamber, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. Another pleasant morning to everyone. I must say this is the second year we have been able to host this power breakfast with the Ministry of Finance, and in particular with Mr. Francis Fontenelle and Ms. Lafayette. I think this is testament to the Ministry of Finance's commitment to engage the Chamber and share data that is important and useful for decision-making for their business. I also shared with them the results of our business performance survey, so there's reciprocity, right? Our Power Breakfast always seeks to provide valuable information so members are better equipped to navigate the rapidly changing world within which they must operate. Of course, we believe as a chamber, as I said before, we must ensure our members are well fed, even if it's only for 3 times a year when we do our Power Breakfast. The events of the chamber do provide additional opportunities. One is networking, and because of the tardy start, I did see some people pressing flesh and putting faces to the names of business colleagues that they speak to often on the phone. It also, I think, this Power Breakfast in particular helps us all to understand the terrible traffic that we face and we need to address because it has serious economic impact on the business community. The time lost and wasted in traffic, especially when we can do better, needs to be addressed. And I'm not saying that just because Ministry of Finance is here and they're preparing their budget, but I say it because I think it's an issue as a country we need to come to grips with. One business person said to me, before they could have made 2 or 3 trips to the south of the island from up north. Now they could only make for sure 1 trip a day. 60% less. Just imagine if any business or country loses 60% productivity, 60% revenue. Food for thought. I also take this opportunity because I send out emails, and you all say I send out too many emails, to update you on a couple of things. One, our annual general meeting takes place on the 27th of November, and those of you who have not registered, you would have noted a particular tint and taste to the food. If you register, that goes, and it is even better. So please register for the AGM. Our guest speaker at our AGM is Genevieve Remy. Dr. Genevieve Remy, who has been working with the regional negotiating machinery at the Sir Sridhar Ramphal Center. Genevieve is going to be speaking about, the topic is, let's talk trade, what the business community needs to know. There are many things that are currently affecting you in your business, and you do not realize they emanate from trade agreements that St. Lucia is party to. We are hoping to have Mr. Titus Preville join her at that session. We are going to be talking trade. You need to understand why certain things are happening, and you need to understand the opportunities you have as St. Lucia business because of trade issues. You also need to be able to defend your rights, because there are some things that are in law that are not necessarily being implemented and are affecting you. So that's the subject. The other thing is that I want you to note, and some of you would have received yesterday, our business performance survey, take 12. We have deliberately reviewed our business performance survey, and after many complaints and suggestions, I have to admit it was too long and too many questions, and therefore I have reduced, I shouldn't say I, we have reduced the number of questions from 27 to 19. So we are hoping and we are urging you to respond to the business performance survey so that we have larger response rate, so we are more reflective. I do still stand by our current response rate, which is 30%, and to say that it is reflective of our membership. So, well, enough for me for now, and I wish now to invite the representative of our sponsor of the sumptuous meal you've just enjoyed, and the sponsors who have made it possible for us to put on this event. Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome Mr. Kelly Mitchell from Marcy St. Lucia, Head of Marketing.
Thank you very much, Brian. I'd like to acknowledge the members of the head table, and to you fellow business executives, good morning. I am truly honored to be here today representing Marcy Stores St. Lucia Limited as the presenting sponsor of this event, and to continue our commitment to supporting growth and development in this beautiful island called St. Lucia. As a leading integrated retail business in St. Lucia, Marcy Stores has played a significant role not only in meeting the diverse needs of our customers, but also by contributing to the broader economic growth and sustainability of our nation. Our impact is felt across many areas, from recruitment, employment, and training to partnerships with local suppliers and key stakeholders. One such group we are especially proud of is our farmers. Through our annual registered farmers meeting, we engage directly with this vital sector, focusing on supporting farmers to maximize the full potential, and giving them guaranteed markets for their local produce. This program is just one of the ways we continue to contribute to sustainability of our local agriculture sector and the economy. Currently, Marcy Stores employs over 1,400 persons, and together we work diligently to serve our communities. Our network of 13 supermarkets, 3 home stores, 1 gourmet store, and a mega store ensures that we are accessible to all our customers across the island, helping us maintain a position as a trusted and reliable partner in the food and retail business. But it is not all about retail. It is about community. As we continue to grow, so too does our responsibility to make meaningful contributions to the social and economic fabric of St. Lucia. We take great pride in being an active corporate citizen, supporting various initiatives and partnerships that help uplift our nation and improve the lives of its people. On behalf of the entire executive leadership team of Marcy Stores, I would like to express our deepest gratitude to the Chamber and all of you here today for inviting us to participate in this initiative. We also want to acknowledge everyone who plays a part on a daily basis in making St. Lucia a better place for all. We are excited about the future ahead and look forward to the continued growth and prosperity of the island. Thank you for your continued trust in Marcy Stores and for joining us today. And at this juncture, I would just like to announce that we have launched our Christmas campaign for the season, whereby we are going to be giving away over $60,000 in cash and prizes. So check that out the next time you visit your favorite Marcy store. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kelly, and thank you very much, Marcy, for your continued support and active participation in the work and life of the Chamber of Commerce. I think it's important to say that we have members, and Marcy is one of them, who is active in the life of the Chamber, meaning if something is not as it should be, I know I'm going to get a call. I know if I ask a question, Massey will respond. And we have a number of members like that. And I want to thank Massey for that long-standing support. And now I wish to invite the President of the Chamber, Mr. Ross Gardner, to offer the official welcome. Mr. Gardner.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed members of the St. Lucia Chamber of Commerce, Industry and Agriculture, distinguished guests, invited guests, sponsors, and friends, adopting the protocol already established. It is truly a privilege to welcome you all to this morning's Chamber Power Breakfast, a platform where ideas meet data and where discussions inspire action. Today, as we come together in this collaborative space, we are united by our shared commitment to the economic vitality of our beloved St. Lucia. Our mission remains to foster sustainable business growth and development of our members through strong leadership, strategic advocacy, and innovative services, whilst enabling them to positively impact their communities. I'm going to stray a little bit from my remarks. We heard the talk this morning and what happened yesterday, and just to acknowledge that it is indeed a very sad situation when crime and these incidents spill out into civil society and begin to affect our businesses. Our board has taken it very seriously, and we have been working on a comprehensive strategy above and beyond our regular system of advocacy and engagement. And law and order remains, as is identified in all our surveys that you, our members, fill out. 30%, Brian, thereabouts, have now identified, moving up through the ranks, law and order and crime as one of the significant issues affecting your businesses. We have heard you speak. We are membership driven, and we will continue to engage, advocate, and develop strategy and policy and advocacy to address this issue. Now back to the regularly scheduled. We are particularly excited about today's session, which is centered around a timely and critical topic, St. Lucia's Economic Prospects 2024-2025. This subject is not just relevant, it is fundamental to our planning, decision-making, and the strategies we must collectively adopt to navigate the challenges and opportunities ahead. I would like to extend a special welcome to our keynote presenters, Mr. Francis Fontenelle, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance, Economic Development, the Youth Economy, and Ms. Jenna Lafayette, Head of Research and Policy, who will provide us with the most up-to-date economic data, forecasts, and projections on St. Lucia's economic performance. Your insights and analysis will undoubtedly offer valuable context as we, as business leaders, position ourselves for a dynamic and impactful rest of 2024 and upcoming 2025. This morning's Power Breakfast is made possible through the generous support of our sponsor, Massey St. Lucia. Thank you. On behalf of the Chamber and all our members, I express our heartfelt thanks for your partnership and unwavering commitment to fostering dialogue, crucial information dissemination, best practice and knowledge sharing, and development within our business community. As we delve into today's discussions, let us remember the immense potential that collaboration holds. Our ability to align our goals, country, and business community, advocate for evidence-based policies, listen to and engage the business community, and champion sustainable practices will be crucial as we seek to strengthen the pillars of our economy. The Chamber remains steadfast in its mission to support you, our members, as you contribute to St. Lucia's economic growth. I urge you all to actively engage, ask questions, and reflect on how the insights shared today can inform your business strategies and the collective progress of our nation. With that, I once again warmly welcome you all to this Massey St. Lucia Power Breakfast. I wish us an informative and engaging session. Thank you, and let's look forward to an enlightening presentation and fruitful discussions ahead. Let's get started. Thank you.
I have some fairly young daughters and son, and the last time they saw me doing something like that, they said, "Daddy, get your phone. You got to carry this laptop or iPad." But I explained to them that, Daddy can't see nothing on the phone. So they recommended classes. But still, and those of you who have kids, you will understand what I mean when I say still. We get great advice. Ladies and gentlemen, let me give a quick bio on our guest speakers. Mr. Francis Fontenelle currently holds the position of Permanent Secretary in the Department of Finance and is accountable to the Minister of Finance for the administration of the department. Previously, he held the position of Director of Finance in the Ministry of Finance in St. Lucia. He is responsible for Public Finance Management Act and directly responsible for the debt and investment, financial sector oversight, and procurement units. Prior to that, he was a senior banking specialist at the Banking and Monetary Operations Department at the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. In that position, he was the head of Payment System Development and Oversight Unit. He was also the budget director as well as the deputy director of finance with responsibility for debt and investments for the government of St. Lucia earlier on. Mr. Fontenelle holds a Bachelor of Science degree majoring in economics and a Master's of Science degree in accounting from the University of the West Indies, Mono Campus, Jamaica. He also holds a graduate diploma in law and has pursued many short-term professional courses in the area of finance, debt management, reserve management, and payment systems. He's also a certified director from the Caribbean Governance Institute. He's also a sports enthusiast, and his hobbies are playing football, cricket, hiking, and reading. Now, I'm not sure about the playing, but watching football. My children warned me about that, but it's the glasses anyway. The head of policy and research, Ms. Gemma Lafayette. Ms. Lafayette is an economist by training with a distinguished career spanning over 2 decades of professional experience. She joined the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs in 1999 and currently serves as the Director of Research and Policy in the Department of Finance. Her responsibilities are primarily economic reporting and economic performance, conducting macroeconomic analyses and research, forecasting, and providing policy advice to the Cabinet of Ministers on a wide range of issues. Ms. Lafayette holds a master's degree in economics from the University of Warwick and a bachelor's degree from the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, with a major in economics and a minor in finance. Throughout her career, she has pursued numerous short-term professional courses with regional and international financial institutions. Ms. Lafayette has served on various boards, including the CARICOM Development Fund and the St. Lucia Development Bank. From 2014 to 2017, Ms. Lafayette worked as an economist with the International Monetary Fund as its country representative during Grenada's IMF-supported homegrown structural adjustment program. She's a former associate at the Caribbean Public Research Institute, CAPRI, based in Jamaica. Her published research work focused on labor market issues. Prior to her services in the government of St. Lucia, Ms. Lafayette worked at the National Commercial Bank. In terms of recreational interests, Ms. Lafayette is a tennis as well as track and field enthusiast, paying close attention to developments and performance in athletics and athletes in these sporting disciplines. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to invite Permanent Secretary, Mr. Francis Fontenelle, to speak to us about St. Lucia's economic prospects 2024-2025. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Fontenelle.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Lucia. I think, yes, I had to make an adjustment to the CV and remove playing to watching. Yes. My 2 knees are gone, so I certainly cannot play football anymore. But good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and I want to adopt the protocol already established. That notwithstanding, I want to acknowledge the presence of the executive members of the chamber, also the executive director and his team, to all specially invited guests, and to anyone who will have taken time off the busy schedule to be with us this morning in this power breakfast as we come to discuss the economic prospects of the St. Lucian economy. I must indicate that the detailed presentation, as we would have done last year, would be done by the Director of Research. So my role here is just to answer the easy questions. I cannot guarantee you that we will be able to answer all your questions. However, I want to assure you that we will be very respectful and candid in our answers. In my short stint as the permanent secretary in the ministry, I would have met with the members of the chamber on a number of occasions. There were instances where the meetings were subgroupings of the chamber, and there were occasions when it was the chamber as a whole. The meetings weren't always harmonious. However, from my experience, we were always professional and respectful in the conduct of our engagement with each other, and that I want to acknowledge. Say thank you. I distinctly remember my first encounter with the chamber in my current role, and I did appeal for us to work together as a team in the interest of the country. And Mr. Luisi would have taken me up on this, constantly sending me WhatsApp and having long conversations with me, but I certainly enjoy the engagement. Today we are here to provide a candid, technical view of the global and the domestic economy over the past year, and to also provide an indication of prospects of the medium term. I know some of you would have been privy to economic statistics from the real sector as presented by our governor of the central bank. But as you know, that the dynamism of the economy is not constant, and nothing stays the same for long. So perhaps our figures today may differ from what you would have been presented with, as this is the nature of the discipline. Sometimes you just have to find comfort. Sometimes you have to comfort yourself with the trajectory and leave the magnitude to the debaters. As we meet to strategize on ways in which we can improve development, the development potential of our country, we must agree that the economic growth is necessary, but not sufficient in getting this done. This requires us to move beyond just the metric of growth. We need to develop institutions and related legislative framework that would allow for the transformation of the economy, which is necessary for persons to experience and appreciate the benefits of increased economic growth. Over the past year, the government of St. Lucia, in tandem with other OECS countries, embarked on an ambitious legislative agenda, which saw the enactment of the credit reporting bill, together with the credit reporting regulations, the Virtual Assets Business Bill, amendments to the Payment System Rules, the Security Interest in Movable Securities Act, and the Insolvency Act. We are not yet finished, as amendments to the Banking Act 2018, the Virtual Assets Business Regulation, the Securities Bill, and the ECCU Investment Funds Bill are in the queue awaiting their term to be passed. Increased global events ranging from the political to the technological, and when I say that I mean AI, will have a transformative impact on the global community, including our country, St. Lucia. We must also keep our eyes on the climate, as our country will continue to be affected by more devastating natural disasters and challenging our ability to insure against those predicaments through the insurance sector. The government of St. Lucia, through the World Bank, is designing instruments that will assist in improving our resilience as a country to climate change disasters. We have recently seen a change in the political leadership in the helm of the free world, at the helm of the free world. Not that we expect to see any fundamental shift in policy. However, the micro decisions that will invariably influence or affect global trade and investment are issues that we will need to pay close attention to. From all indications, COVID is behind us. We can safely say that COVID is behind us. As Sir Winston Churchill would have said, we should not allow a crisis to go to waste. And as a country, we should focus on building resilience, from building fiscal buffers, reducing our debt ratio, and in general, developing a fiscal responsibility framework. The global outlook looks challenging and in some cases even daunting. However, there is potential for us to grow. There is room for us to do better. And if we have a disciplined approach, we should continue to grow the economy and develop the institutional framework that will lead us to a better country and to increase development. And on that note, I would like to invite my colleague Gemma to give us the actual figures with respect to the economy. Gemma?
I just wish to adopt the protocols already established. We will take you through quite a bit this morning. We don't expect that you will digest all of it during the session today. So we will share the presentation with the chamber for onwards the circulation to this membership. So if there are any further questions thereafter, we would be happy to assist and to actually take them. Just to start off with what has happened and to take off from where Mr. Fontenelle actually left. Of course, we have all witnessed possibly a shift in the free world, as you said, with the election results of the US election about 2 weeks ago. It leaves us with a lot of great uncertainty regarding what's going to happen with the largest economy in the world and its impact on St. Lucia and, of course, the rest of the world. So this morning we will take you through the global developments, the recent developments and the outlook. The outlook presented here represents the pre-US election outlook. That was presented by the International Monetary Fund in middle of October. Of course, thereafter, many different scenarios have been presented or been fine-tuned as to exactly what happens when, from January, February, when the new president actually takes office, remains to be seen. So we will just wanted to basically highlight that caveat and put it in context, because some of what has been said here might change in the course of 2025. So we'll take a look at how, for St. Lucia, the developments in 2024 so far, and the outlook for the last quarter, as well as looking at the medium term, 25 to 26. Touch a bit on the financial sector developments. Mr. Fontenelle mentioned and highlighted some of the structural financial reforms that the government has undertaken in recent years, which has come a long way. It's been in the working for quite some time, and that has a positive impact. Of course, there are a few left to be done, but it's been tremendous progress to date. We will also zero in on the central government's fiscal developments and the debt, what has happened with our public debt stock, and the trajectory for both our fiscal path and the debt ratios going forward. And then we will close with some remarks on some of the issues actually confronting the country as a whole and more to the private sector. To start off with the global and financial economic developments, again, the latest available comprehensive projections for the global economy lies and projects that for 2024, growth rate of about 3.2% is what is being projected now, and the same rate of 3.2% is projected for 2025. However, there's a high degree of uncertainty regarding this outlook, and there are quite a bit of downside risk, as well as some upsides based on what happens in the next few months. For 2022 so far, the outturn in the economy has been better than expected. That's largely due to the strong consumption and non-residential investments that have been taken place. Consumption has been supported by increases in wages, which were in the aftermath of COVID. There were quite a bit of wage increases, again, somewhat commensurate with the spike in inflation that we saw in the years 21, 22, and 2023. However, for the US, we are looking at a slowdown as a result of the previously expected fiscal tightening. As to the degree of what would happen with some of the fiscal policies espoused by Mr. Trump, that we're not quite clear as to exactly what that would mean. But he's promised, of course, on cuts in spending, especially military spending, et cetera. So that would have an impact and effect on what happens with domestic demand in the US. In most of the major advanced economies, which are our trading partners, the US, the UK, Europe to some extent, and in China, most of the outcomes within those economies on the demand and economic activity in these countries are being affected and influenced to some extent by the speed of monetary policy tightening and loosening. So in the post-COVID period, we would have witnessed the increases in the interest rates that the major central banks actually announced and enacted. And we've seen somewhat of an unwinding of those rates in 2024, with several cuts in the major countries. However, while the US performed strong enough in 2024, we saw on the Europe side that the Europe and the rest of the euro area, there's been a significant contraction in recent previous years, and also a very slow, sluggish activity. That is somewhat linked to the fact that Europe has been more effective and more exposed to the war in Ukraine, which has affected oil prices, and so they have gone through a deeper energy crisis than the rest of the world. But with the monetary policy beginning to loosen up, we expect that would generate additional demand, and that is expected to boost economic activity, particularly in Europe, where the activity has been a bit dampened by what I just mentioned. In China, the second largest economy in the world, we've seen that this economy continues to actually be hampered by the bottlenecks or the issues surrounding the property sector, and also fiscal policy as well, and constraints there. So that has resulted in low confidence in China. But overall, the picture is one where modest growth, somewhat akin to pre-COVID levels of just about 3%, 3.2% for both 2024 and 2025. Next slide, please. I will skip through. So across, I can mention there's mixed growth outlook for across the different economies. In Europe, improvements are expected to be seen in the actual growth rates. And in the US and China, we expect to see continued deceleration or lower rates in 2024 and 2025. Next slide, please. On the issue of inflation, which we have spoken about quite a bit during the course of last year, inflation globally has begun to ease. We've seen that the global economy has moved from a rate of 8.7% in 2022 to just about 5.8% projected for 2024, and further reductions to about 4.5% in 2025 and 3.7% in 2026. Again, this is largely linked to some extent for 2024 to the fact that energy prices have actually come down significantly from 2022 to now, and also due to the fact that monetary policy has also basically kept a lid on consumption to some extent in some of the economies. Just to mention, to highlight here what the movements have been in the monetary policy that has been pursued. We would see recently in the US, the Federal Reserve had cut interest rates for the second time in November to just about 3.5%, sorry. And we see similar movements by the Bank of Canada, the Bank of England, as well as the European Central Bank. So this is what I was referring to here when I spoke about, given that inflation has been on a downward trend for the last 12 months or so, monetary policy in most of these economies has been loosening with interest rate cuts taking place in 2024, and further cuts are expected in the coming months. This outlook that I have just highlighted, of course, is surrounded by several risk factors, mainly on the downside, some on the upside. The downside risk would be related to, for one, the persistent geopolitical tensions between the US, the West, and the Middle East, the war in Ukraine, the Ukraine-Russia war, as well as the issue with Israel, Hamas, Lebanon, and possibly Iran. We also, again, the dampened activity in China is putting a drag on the global economy as well. And again, with the US policies going forward, we may see more protectionist trade policies that would affect activity and trade across countries, and possibly affect and maybe disrupt again supply chains to some extent. Also, we see a lot of unrest in certain parts of the world, which could undermine economic confidence and perhaps have a damper on economic growth. So these are the major issues. But again, like I said, the specifics of how this actually play out would depend on a lot depends on the US economy and how it relates to the rest of the world. As we turn our attention to St. Lucia's domestic developments, looking highlight mainly at the key sector, which is tourism, and touch a bit on agriculture, which has been a historically key sector, but now has gotten down to just about 1% of GDP in St. Lucia. So it's not quite significant in terms of the numbers, but in some areas in the rural parts of St. Lucia, it remains significant. And also to look at construction, to see how that is evolving with the slew of projects that both the government and the private sector are embarking on, and also to see some brief developments on the manufacturing sector. Just to present you with the actual data we have at this point in time for 2024. We could see here, if we start with agriculture, which is our smaller sector, we see our once golden bananas have been reduced to very, very low amounts, just about 1,700 tons so far for the first half of the year. And that represents just about a 3.4% reduction compared to the previous year, which again was attributed to weather events. We would have had quite a bit of adverse weather events that have actually affected supply. And also we have issues with cost of production that the farmers are faced with, in addition to financing issues and some pest control issues that has affected production on the supply side. And the same thing happened with pretty much with crops. So there's not been significant growth in agriculture. The bright spots, or the growth areas within the agriculture sector, has been in the livestock sector, where we see chicken production increasing by just about 18% for the first 3 quarters of the year, and as well egg production just about 9% for the first 9 months of the year. In tourism, our lead sector, we've seen significant growth. Up to September, for January-September period, there was about a 16% increase in stay-over arrivals. Some of that has gone, most of it has gone to the traditional hotels. Others have gone through the Airbnb type subsector, which is expanding. But all in all, the recorded bed nights, which to some extent does not cover all of the Airbnb accommodation, shows just about a 7.3% increase. That development, or that outturn in the stay-over arrivals, has been supported by a huge expansion in airlift from all the major source markets, the US, the UK, the Caribbean, and even Canada. On the cruise side, we see just about a 9.2% increase. That sector is still quite below pre-COVID levels and is expected to recover by 2026 fully. Stay-over arrivals are expected to recover this year above pre-COVID levels. As it relates to inflation, for St. Lucia domestically, we've seen that there's been a similar trend as in the other countries where there's been a gradual decline in the rate of inflation. Prices are still increasing, but the rate at which the prices are increasing is slowing. So as of June, based on a 12-month moving average, we see that the inflation rate is about 0.8%, and that compares with about 7.1% in 2023. So there's quite a substantial change in the rate of speed of price increases. But we do acknowledge that the prices are still increasing. And in some cases, the prices have declined. For instance, electricity prices have gone down by about 3 to 5% based on the category of users. And fuel prices has gone down by varying degrees, 1% at least for gasoline. And LPG as well, we've seen about a 10% decrease in the price of LPG prices. For manufacturing, we see a contraction for the first half of the year based on the available data. Again, the data here is limited. The response rate and the submission of data by the private sector to the CSO is somewhat limited in that area. Again, the main sector that has resulted in that has been a contraction in the beverage subsector, particularly alcoholic beverages, as a result of declines in export demand and exports to some key markets. But overall, on the import side of things, we see that the value of the goods imported to St. Lucia, our import bill, has gone up by about 6.2% for the first 8 months of 2024. And our exports, although increased by 13%, is still very, very low compared to our exports. So if you look at the ratio of exports to imports, it's quite low. The exports are just about 1/10 of the value of what we actually import. On the construction side, which is a lot of buzz of construction for this year, we see that the value of materials imported for construction purposes has actually gone up by about 21%. There's also been issues with supply of certain materials. You have the shortage of cement and other materials into St. Lucia. And so we'll talk a bit more about construction in the coming slides. But let me just move on to the electricity, which is normally a good indicator of overall economic activity. The electricity produced for the period January to August has gone up by about 8.3%, and we see that across the domestic usage, hotel usage, industrial and commercial usage have all gone up. So it's clearly an indication that the economic activity has certainly expanded in 2024. Water consumption, on the other hand, again, somewhat has increased a bit based on the recorded data, but they're still plagued with supply issues from WASCO in certain areas. And on the fuel side, gasoline consumption has gone up by about 2.6%, but diesel has gone up by much more, 9%, as a result of increased economic activity as well. On the financial sector, we see here that the loans, when you compare August with August, year on year, or the 2 years, the loans, the volume or the balance of loans owed in the banking system has dipped a bit by just about 1%, but deposits continue to grow very strongly by about 13%. When we break down the loans that has been granted by the banks, the stock of loans as at August, we see that household credit continues to grow, again, for various consumption loans and mortgages, et cetera. But business credits, the loans to the private sector for investment and for expansion, for working capital, et cetera, would have actually contracted. So we continue to see very tepid availability of credit to the private sector, an issue that will have to be addressed going forward if we are to actually make a dent in raising the trajectory of our growth path. And we see the deposit of the central government, that fluctuates quite a bit based on what's happening. But pretty much the deposits amount to just about close to $300 million as of August. In terms of the outlook for 2024, the projected outlook for 2024 and 2025, we are, based on available data and information, we are projecting real GDP growth of about 4.3% for St. Lucia for 2024. And we are expecting that to somewhat still be stronger than the average, historical average. We are expecting a growth rate of about 3.6% for 2025 and 3.3% for 2026. Of course, for the chart below, we could see that the levels of GDP would have actually surpassed the pre-COVID levels since 2023. So we are currently above pre-COVID levels in terms of what the recovery that has taken place over the last few years. To break it down by sectors, we see here that construction and tourism will continue to lead the way in terms of generating additional economic activity in 2025 to 2027. We are looking at a roughly real value added for the sector of about 6.2% in 2024 for accommodation and about 4% for 2025. For construction, we are projecting about 10.9% for 2024 and an accelerated growth of 15% in 2025, reflective of the intensification of projects implementation, both on the public side and in the private sector. And for agriculture and manufacturing, the numbers are as follows: 2024, 4%, and manufacturing, a contraction of about 3.8%. And for 2025, agriculture is expected to be just about 6%, and manufacturing 2% growth. For tourism, just to take a closer look at tourism, we would see that, and for stay of arrivals, that in every single month in 2024, arrivals have actually exceeded the previous year. But in terms of when you compare to 2019, which is a white chart, the white line graph, we see that in the months of July and August would have been the only months for which St. Lucia have recorded lower arrivals than in 2019. September for 2024 was the only month so far that has had a contraction year on year. For 2024, every other month has had more than the previous year. But overall, we would have spoken about it before, that there was about a 16% increase, and that's been led by significant growth in the US arrivals, which rose by about 22% for that 9-month period. And again, the increase in airlift availability of additional air services and also the hosting of events in St. Lucia would have tremendously contributed to that outturn. And in terms of visitor expenditure, we also see that visitor expenditure would have gone up by 16%, based on the estimated numbers for that, based again on surveys. And for bed nights, the recorded bed nights at hotels, we see that we see an increase of about 7% for that period. I think I will skip through the slide because pretty much just to say here that the expansion in airlift amounted to about 20% in 2024 compared to 2023. And that pretty much gives you a breakdown of the monthly, what has happened over the months. And then in terms of the coming period for the first quarter of 2025, based on the scheduled airlift for St. Lucia, we see a further expansion in airlift of just about another 20% thereabout. So with that, and also based on some forward bookings indications, we are expecting somewhat of a strong increase still, but a little bit less than last year for tourism for St. Lucia. Again, we would also not have the effects of Cricket World Cup, which would have contributed to a significant non-traditional visitors in the month of June. We also had, well, now we have the hosting of, well, we just had the hosting of the Cricket West Indies team with England. So that is not expected to be repeated next year. So these are two events that would have contributed but not expected to do so in the coming year. And of course, Carnival was a lot stronger, and there were other events like the regional swim meets and other events. So the capacity in 2025, airlift capacity overall for the first quarter, we see this is here, the picture here of exactly what's expected to happen, an increase of just about 37,000 seats additional for St. Lucia for next year. So the first quarter, which is a typical winter season, looks quite strong at this point in time. So with that, for the year as a whole, we are projecting that stay-over arrivals will surpass, of course, pre-COVID levels by in 2024, and it's expected to continue to increase by just about 4 to 5% in 2025. Cruise arrivals are expected to grow by 11% in 2024 and to continue to grow until it reaches the pre-COVID levels by the year 2026. In terms of the construction sector, just to run you through, we have presented a similar slide last year, just to give you an update as to exactly what has transpired. The list of the projects, for the most part, remains the same, for a few minus and pluses here or there. But there's been delays in some construction projects. So the Millennium Highway, which we all would have witnessed, there's been delays in that project, and it's been extended to for a completion time of March 2026. Again, that project is largely funded by the UK CIF grant. 2026 to be completed.
Or 2025?
2026. The project has 3 phases. The lot from the old Victoria Hospital, right there to the KFC, the roundabout at cul-de-sac. That's phase 1. Right, yes, correction. That's phase 1. Phase 2 takes you from...
When does phase 1 finish?
I think they're running concurrent. It should be in a few months, in the next few months, but I can't give definitively when it will be in the next few months. Okay. So phase 2, which is from that point to all the way to ancillary, is phase 2, and phase 3, ancillary to Soufriere. So the 2 phases, phase 2 and 3, have been done concurrently, and you've seen signs that they've started different parts of it. But overall, the entire project, which is from the start to the finish, phases 1, 2, and 3, I expect it to be completed by March 2026.
May I suggest that we disaggregate it like we used to? To Julian Alfred is Millennium Highway. From Millennium Highway to Soufriere is the West Coast Road. Because if you tell people the
No, I have Millennium Highway stroke West Coast Road rehabilitation.
If you get a stroke, see the contractor. See the contractor have a stroke. No, I'm serious. We should classify it that way because disaggregate it
Sure.
so people understand clearer. And because my first reaction was, you said that last year.
You're right.
Last year you said it would be finished by March. In fact, the Minister of Infrastructure said it
Yeah,
would be finished by March this year, and now we're saying 2026 and not 2027.
Yeah. So the different components, of course, all phases have been slower than expected, particularly the first phase, which is the Millennium Highway rehabilitation, has been delayed. So all in all, the project itself is called that's what it's called. So that's just what it is, but it has the different phases. So the majority of the works are expected to be done on phase 2 and phase 3 from the second quarter onwards to the end, March 2026. Another project, please don't stop in that one, St. Jude construction. The St. Jude Hospital reconstruction, it has been ongoing, again in different phases. So the entire project is expected to be completed somewhere around October 2026. Yes? Yeah. And also on the health sector, works are expected to, we are projecting that based on where things are at, of the new Sufre Hospital, that works would start sometime in the first quarter, second quarter of 2025, and continue on for the next 24 months thereafter. The Grocery Police Station, a smaller project, about $26 million in terms of cost, is expected to be completed during the course of 2025. As you can see, progress has been made on that project. For the Uranora International Airport, two projects, the major one being the terminal recommencement of the terminal construction, but the tower construction has continued. It had started in June of 2023, and it continues, and it should be completed soon, by the second half of, for the first half of 2025. But the terminal recommencement, we have assumed that it will recommence in the quarter 1 towards quarter 2 of 2025 and continue thereafter into 2027. For the cruise port, the redevelopment project in conjunction with the GPH, that is expected to commence in 2025 and to end sometime by the end of 2026. The Halls of Justice, where you could see the site, the clearing of the site has been, the demolition has taken place, and they've commenced preparatory works for construction. That is being done in under a bolt arrangement with NIPRO, and that is expected well, it has started to some extent in this quarter. For there are various housing projects that has been announced by the government. We have some, for instance, the NIC SLDB loan facility of about $20 million to basically unlend mortgages to persons. We also have the Rock Hall housing, which is supposed to be a CIP-related funding project. And also there's been discussions regarding the preparations for the Talvin housing. So that is expected to take place during the period 25-26. The police headquarters in Castries is expected to commence sometime in 2026 through to 2028. And then there's also plans afoot for the Sufre administrative building, just about $15 million in cost, to basically start in 2025, the second half of 2025, into 2026. On the private sector, for the private sector construction, we have seen the continued works on the Marriott Hotel in Point Seraphin. That is expected to be completed in the first quarter of 2026. We have seen for the Dreams and Zoe Tree in Canel Miku, a CIP-related project. Phase 1 has had some sort of setback. There's been some sort of a halt for the last few months, but it's expected to recommence soon, again, some partly related to availability and supplies of materials, and some the project now is expected and awaiting some prefab structures from China, etc. But that is expected to be completed by the third quarter of 2026. The Bay Gardens expansion has continued, but that project too has faced some sort of setback in terms of availability of supplies, materials to some extent. So that is expected to be completed by the quarter 3 of 2025. Sandals Lotok expansion, which is just about an expansion of about 20 suites, is expected to be completed by the end of next month, and to open up sometime in the first quarter of 2025. At Cabot, the construction of the accommodation and residences at that site has been slower than expected. However, based on their plans and the work that's been prepared and planned, we expect that works will pick up in 2024 for the construction of the Fairway Villas, the clubhouse, the horizontal villas, etc. So it is a continuous package of construction, possibly for the next 5 to 7 years, to basically incrementally work on construction of villas. For the Seacrest Resort and Spa, which is formerly the Wyndham Morgan Bay Resort on the Shock Hill, that is expected to reopen in 2025, in the quarter 1 of 2025. And of course, a major project, which is the demolition and reconstruction of the demolition of the Starfish and Mystic Hotel on the Redry Beach is expected to be demolished sometime in 2025 for reconstruction of a major luxury resort on that stretch of beach. And it's quite a substantive amount in terms of the scale of investments. Again, it's close by on the Mont Pima, the Caribbean Jewel Seven Wonders project has continued the pace and is expected to continue on for the next 2 to 3 years for phase 1. And of course, we've seen the clearing of the site at the Rodney Bay City Center, close to the Aquatic Center. The site has been cleared, so construction is expected to commence early in 2025 through to 2027. And we await also the commencement of construction for a smaller project in Vieux-Fort, which is the Dadahe Vieux-Fort Commercial Center, costing about $40 million. And that is expected to be, if on schedule, to be wrapped up by 2027. So this is pretty much the list of some of the projects, and we've just provided here some visuals so you can actually see some of the extents of the works and the status of the works. Okay, moving on, next slide, just to go through. Next. Okay. Moving on to agriculture. We had spoken about it a bit earlier. We see that chicken production especially has increased notably in 2024, and that has been because of the expansion of production by a large producer, although there were some exit of some smaller farmers. Next slide, Fufina. The banana industry, again, beloved industry, continues to grapple with supply issues as well as cost issues, as well as weather issues. And also drought. We had droughts, we had heavy rains. So all of that come together has actually affected the production and supply of bananas, both in the domestic market and also externally. We mainly export to the region currently. St. Lucia has not recommenced exports to the UK in any significant way. That is unexpected to happen anytime soon, meaning not next year. However, the exports to in the region are expanding for some countries. So our main exporters are Antigua, Barbados, St. Kitts. I think I'm missing one. There's another one. Yeah. Essentially, these are the main ones. And recently, in conjunction with Exports St. Lucia, there have been shipments have commenced to Canada for bananas. So that is expected to add to the output that is expected in 2025. Again, output in 2025 would be subject to the weather events and to what extent the weather permits production of the demanded bananas. Next slide. Moving on to inflation, we see here that for crude oil prices, particularly the U.S. benchmark, WTI, has decreased by about 2% in 2024 to just about US 77.50 cents per barrel. And that is expected to continue to decrease to just about $73 per barrel in 2025. Again, the factors affecting that are many factors actually come into play on the supply and the demand side. On the demand side, part of the reason why we've seen the decrease in 2024 has been a large importer in the world, China. The slowdown in that economy there has affected global demand, and that has put a lid on prices. Whereas the U.S. production, the U.S. Guyana has increased significantly. That also basically kept prices down in 2024, despite the continued production cuts by OPEC plus countries, including Russia, to limit supply so as to prop up in prices. So we have the two forces happening at the same time to basically clear the market at the rates, at the amounts, the prices that we see here. So for inflation in St. Lucia, we are projecting a lower inflation rate than in 2023. We see that inflation rates, which has escalated in 2022 to 6.4%, had come down to about 4.1% in 2023, and now we're expecting an inflation rate of about no more than about 1.25% in 2024, and a similar rate for 2025. Again, I would have said that we saw, for the most part, that the rate of increase in prices have come down, but in some prices, we actually saw a decline in some prices, which is like electricity cost. as well as in some fuel prices, most fuel prices. On the unemployment side, you would have heard about the steady declines that we've witnessed or that's been recorded in unemployment. Both the national unemployment rate in the quarter two of 2024 stands at about 18%, and the national, 11%, and the youth unemployment at a higher rate of about 18%. That has come down significantly, as you can see, from the pre-COVID rates for the youth unemployment, it's in the range of 30 to 40%, and for the national unemployment, about 20 to 25%. So there's been a significant downturn in unemployment as a result of the continued economic expansion that has happened since COVID. For St. Lucia, again, the factors that may dampen that economic outlook relate to, well, weather events, climate change effects on different sectors, the impact of the geopolitical tensions across the world and how it affects prices globally and availability of supplies, etc. Also, the economic conditions in our trading partner countries, particularly the US, Europe, Canada. Any slowdown in those countries than is expected could result in lower than expected projected growth rates for St. Lucia for the medium term. And of course, more locally, any further delays in the construction sector, be it in the private or public sector, as it relates to implementation of projects, and the extent to which those hotel projects are now beginning to somewhat mitigate against such of the factors. We see some of the hotels actually establishing cement plants on site to help deal with the importation issue that has been experienced with cements and other materials. So these are some of the major factors. There are other factors, but these are the major ones that we need to keep our eye on and that could affect the economic outturn for St. Lucia in the medium term. In the financial sector, I think I would have touched on that a bit. We see that deposits continue to increase very steadily at strong rates annually. And at the same time, the loans are growing at a very tepid rate. As a result of that, there's been quite a bit of excess liquidity in the banking system. The debt loans to deposit ratio has reached somewhat of a historic low of about 60% as of June 2024. And it also reflects the extent to which the banks are somewhat a bit cautious in their lending regarding some of the concerns that they have regarding legislation and other concerns. Like I mentioned before, private sector credit continues to remain weak. We see that when we compare the stock in December 2023 to August 2024, that household credit has increased by about 2.4%, and business credit has increased by about 1.2%, decreased. So overall, private sector credits actually were quite weak, and that is another area of concern, which is pretty much putting a lid, or basically some of the bottleneck, or holding back the potential for economic growth forward. So if we were to actually make further inroads on raising our GDP growth rates going forward, this issue to some extent has to be addressed. The government has attempted to address some of these issues by increasing access to credit, and I guess it has just started. Most of the legislation has just recently come into effect, and the impact of that is expected to be felt in coming years. On the delinquency rate side, we see here that the non-performing loans ratio still high for St. Lucia, one of the highest in the ECCU. It's just about 11.6% as of June 2024, although it has come down from the rates that we saw in 2023. And that is also to some extent affecting the bank's decisions in lending decisions. However, we see that the banks have continued to record improvements in profitability since COVID, when they experienced a huge decline, and there's been progressive improvements, for instance, of their profitability going forward. For the financial sector structural reforms, like I mentioned, and Mr. Fontenelle alluded to that earlier in his speech, we see the government has finally done the credit reporting legislation that has been enacted in March 2023, and the plans to basically get that moving with the credit bureau are quite advanced. The bankruptcy and insolvency legislation has been passed in Parliament earlier this year. The secure transactions was done last year, and it's also expected to, there's been quite a bit of loans that have been disbursed under that as a result of that legislation. However, the foreclosure legislation, which has been something that the banking sector has talked about for quite some time, remains pending, and work is expected to continue on that on the government side into 2025. In terms of the government's fiscal position and the fiscal performance, just to recap from the budget speech earlier this year, we saw that in the 2024 revenue measures included namely the extension of the ongoing tax amnesty, which expires in May 2025. That would be our, and we also see the continuation of the continuation of the concessions on the hybrid and electrical vehicles, which is in effect until November 2025. And we see a new measure of a waiver of residential, the continuation of the waiver of the residential land and house tax, which is the property tax. It continues for the 7th or into the 8th year. Since 2017, it has been waived. And we've also seen for this year a new waiver of stamp duty on residential mortgages for construction, repairs, renovations on the first $400,000. As it relates to the government's expenditure measures, there are quite a bit of smaller expenditure measures that were announced and actually done. There's an increase in the minimum pension payable by the government for the government pensioners, not the NIC pensioners, the central pensioners. NIC also increased it, but we're speaking here about the central government developments. Also, there were one-off payments to early childhood centers that took place in August. And also there were some compensation packages made to banana farmers in lieu of the shortage of banana boxes early in the year, and to also assist in subsidizing some of the cost of production. In terms of the actual performance so far, for the first half of the fiscal year, April to September 2024, we see that grants has actually fallen as well as non-tax revenue, but tax revenue collections has done better than expected, rising by about $25 million vis-a-vis the year before. So for that period, the government would have actually collected $691 million in terms of receipts for the combination of tax revenue, grants, and non-tax revenue. As a result of that, this has been driven mainly by increases in receipts from VAT, which has gone up by about 19 million. Health and security levy, we have the full year's effect of that. Recall that this measure was actually implemented in August of 2023 on the import side, and in November on the domestic side for services. And so this financial year, 24-25, we see the first full year's effect of that. So as a result of that, we've seen quite a significant increase in revenue. Sorry? So last year, we'd have collected for that period, the 6 months, April to September, only $3 million in the health and security levy. For that same period, this year, April to September, we're looking at $19 million. So an increase of about $16 million in the health and security levy. For the airport service charge, we also saw an increase of about $7 million in the airport service charge. Again, this is what has been paid on tickets coming into St. Lucia. Also, we see similar increases in taxes at the border, import duty, and customs service charge, again, associated with the increase in economic activity and the increase in the value of imports into St. Lucia. And just to take a closer look at what has happened with fuel tax. For the period April to September, we see just about $33 million being collected in the 24-25. Again, this number here represents the collections from gasoline and diesel minus the subsidy on LPG. So there has been increase in rates, particularly from since September. So we expect that the collections to be much higher in 24-25 than in 23-24 by the end of the year. So we're looking roughly at about $75 million by the end of this financial year for excise tax, net excise tax, compared to about $68 million in the previous year. So, property tax collections. As at September, we see that the government has collected an increase of about $4 million this year. just about $15.1 million up to September. I believe up to October, we're looking at $16.8 million that's been collected up to October. For the year as a whole, we were expecting somewhere in the region of $25 to $30 million for this phase of the tax amnesty program. And in terms of the year-end outlook from the revenue side, overall, we're looking at total revenue and grants being just about 1.515 billion for St. Lucia. It represents a small shortfall vis-a-vis the budgeted amounts. Again, mainly because of the performance of grants. Grants intake is expected to be lower than planned and projected or budgeted. Again, related to the slowdown I spoke about under the Millennium Highway West Coast Road Rehabilitation Project that's been funded by the CIP, by the UK CIF grant. And also some on the non-tax revenue side, so a decline on the CIP-related non-tax revenue receipts. So that's pretty much what we're expecting. But revenue is expected to trend upwards and to grow by just about 3% in the medium term in the coming budget year, 25-26, and thereafter. So we expect annual averages of about 3% every year. And roughly, in terms of our tax policy stance, our revenue collections approximate to about 21% of GDP. And some would argue in the international community that there is still some space for the government to tax more. So the prudential ratio, pretty much roughly for countries like St. Lucia, is seen to be like around 25% of GDP. So we're still 4 percentage points away from that.
Don't believe that.
Yes, so pretty much that's the revenue picture for St. Lucia. So you can see that there's been a speedy recovery from the downturn that we saw since COVID. And we've gone back to our pre-COVID trends of upward movements in our total revenue collections. On the expenditure side, for this year, just to take a look at the first half developments, we see here that expenditure is lower than expected and lower than budgeted, and also lower than last year. Total expenditure is expected to fall by about it fell by $33 million in the first half of the year to just about $675 million. Again, that's largely due to a sharp contraction in capital expenditure because of slow implementation of projects. So we see increases mainly in every other category, but capital expenditure is pretty much the reason why, and to some extent, some parts of goods and services like consultancy, which is related to capital expenditure and projects, has actually gone down. If we could skip that. Right, so total expenditure. For the year-end outlook, we expect net expenditure to be moving from $1.563 billion in 23-24 to just about $1.655 billion. Now this number here, let me just put a caveat on that, represents, it's not the, sorry, which slide are you on? Just 1 sec. Right, yeah. Are we on the same slide? Yeah. Right, so vis-a-vis the budgeted amounts, of the budget estimates would have been $1.894 billion, and we're looking at a year-end outturn of about $1.655 billion. Again, the shortfall is really mainly on the capital expenditure side, but also on other items, but mainly capital expenditure. We're looking at capital expenditure for the end of the year of about $159 million, compared to what is budgeted of about $299 million. So it's quite a significant variance between what is budgeted and what the year-end outlook is likely to be. Yeah, so these are the main highlights for expenditure. In terms of the balances, as a result of what I would have just mentioned, an improvement in revenue, deduction in expenditure, we expect that a significant improvement in the government's overall fiscal deficits, moving from 2% of GDP in 23-24 to just about 0.5% of GDP in this financial year. This would have been one of the lowest rates for fiscal deficits in St. Lucia, for quite some time. But going forward, we expect that when capital expenditure and other expenditures actually increase, that the government's fiscal deficit would be enlarged in the next 3 years in the vicinity of about 2.5% of GDP in 25-26 to just above 2% for the years thereafter. which would then lead us to higher public debt stock. Right. So the debt stock has increased in 2024-25. And again, we could see here that it would be just about, for the central government, for this year, we are projecting pretty much $4.8 billion for the central government and just about $400 million for the statutory bodies. So that takes us to just slightly above the $5 billion mark for the debt stock, for public debt stock, which includes government guaranteed debt. And we expect that to increase going forward, again, based on our assumption that the UNO International Airport expansion, the terminal recommencement project will take place next year. To the extent that that happens, then your drawdowns on the debt that is associated with that is expected to add to our debt stock for the next 2 to 3 years. Based on that, and given our forecast for GDP, we are expecting that by the end of this financial year, that our public debt to GDP ratio would stand around 74.4% of GDP, which is an increase from last year of 72.4%. And going forward, for the medium term, the next 3 years, we expect it to be ranging just about 75% to 77% for the next 3 years thereafter. So we could see here that the line at above shows the government's trajectory, if nothing, based on baseline forecast, if the government does not change its policy stance. And what the flat line here represents what the ECCU regional debt target is of 60%, which countries are expected to attain by the year 2035. So based on St. Lucia's path, we see that we're somewhat away from that path. So in order to basically bring us in line with that path by the year 2035, the government may have to consider fiscal consolidation, some ways to increase revenue or make it more efficient, collections, and also expenditure containment to some extent, so as to narrow the gap between the target and St. Lucia's path, to take us to 60% of GDP. And just to report, that might be of interest to you in terms of the domestic payables that is owed to mainly the private sector and some of the public entities like the NIC, for instance. As at the end of October, what the government owed in those domestic liabilities amounted to about $97 million. You'll recall that during the COVID period that we had substantial increases in the stock of domestic payables, which exceeded $170 million in some months. And that has come down significantly from the COVID period to now. There's been a significant improvement at the end of the last financial year, and we see some uptick so far this year, but that is expected to head downward as we progress towards the end of this financial year. So pretty much this is the debt picture. And as it relates to the government's financing needs going forward, we're looking at, for this year, last year and this year, the stock of funds that the government would be required for its operations would have been below $1 billion, just about $926 million for this financial year. And we see similar thing expected in 25-26, under $1 billion, just about $980 million. That is, those 3 years represent low amounts relative to previous years where the government had to raise funds in excess of $1 billion in the past years. So that's the picture of what is expected in the coming year based on where we stand now. Of course, that's subject to change as we move towards the preparation of the next budget, 25-26. And just to conclude, I think I've said a lot. In terms of the challenges, we're all aware of what the challenges are facing the country as a whole, as well as the private sector. Of course, the high cost of production permeates throughout, especially electricity cost. The efforts at energy sector reform to basically move towards renewable energy has not yet produced results, but efforts are continuing with, I think, at least the first steps with the redoing of the Electricity Supply Act. There's been consultations on that so as to bring in some changes that would hopefully redound to lower cost. We've seen the limited access to financing despite the ample pool of funds stocked up at the commercial banks that businesses are not able to tap into those funds so as to basically generate additional economic activity. So that's whatever rigidities or bottlenecks that exist there, we will have to continue to actually try to deal and address those problems through legislation and other actions. We spoke about the uncertainty in the global environment, particularly now with new governments in almost half of the world. There was election, and I think half of the population of the world would have gone to elections in the course of 2024. The US, the UK, for instance. Also, we see that the government, the pressures on the government for public expenditure are mounting. We all complain and basically put pressures, road infrastructure, healthcare needs, etc. So in terms of salary increases, the government is currently in negotiations with the trade unions for salary increases for the past triennium ending 24-25, 23-24, and the next triennium is also being negotiated at the same time up through to 2028. So that is also will be a pressure point and cause an increase in the government's expenditure. And also we see the effects of global climate change across the world. It's just, the recent rains and water in St. Lucia for the last few days also show exactly what happens in that. And also with that, globally especially, we see the reinsurance cost and the impact of insurance cost in St. Lucia. There's been a significant increase in property cost and property insurance cost and even vehicle cost, especially. And that is expected to continue as we see more and more of the effects, the damaging effects of climate change. Then we were just having a sidebar with Mr. Gardner about labor market issues. We saw that St. Lucia would have actually implemented the minimum wage legislation, and we continue to see the impact or continue to experience shortages in terms of the availability and supply of skilled labor force and the attitudes and et cetera. So the availability of the labor supply, the labor supply is an issue. We see it affecting the construction projects, particularly in St. Lucia, and that's why we see some projects are actually importing workers at certain levels. On the financial side, we spoke about the issues with financing. And in terms of looking forward, to the extent, so basically what things that need to be done or considered in terms of trying to enhance our economic growth and development and to build our resilience. To the extent at which everybody, private sector, public sector, adopts artificial intelligence and in a way that it does not compete with exacerbating the labor market issues that we see. To the extent to which the blue and the orange economy would actually provide avenues and sources of growth for St. Lucia is another area that needs to be looked at, as well as the youth economy. How do we begin to harness the energy and the potential of our youth and to strengthen the contribution of MSMEs and small businesses? And also something that has been spoken about for quite some time, to what extent the government, the speed at which the government is actually undertaking improvements in the delivery of its government, of the services to the private sector and to the citizens, would also go a long way in actually improving our growth outcomes.
Let me say that our work at the Secretariat, at the Chamber of Commerce, at the Secretariat level and at the board is not as clear-cut and as straightforward as it may appear. We have to look after the interests of our members as priority. We also look after the interests of the business community, I would say the second tier. And thirdly, we look after the interests of the country, because we cannot operate profitably or effectively in a country that's not doing well. So one of the statements we make consistently is that we believe, we are convinced that what is good for business is good for the country. And we also believe what is good for the country is good for business. We sometimes just have to rethink how we look at issues. We have stopped talking about chamber positions. We refuse to adopt a position until we have assessed and understood and stated what our interests are. And to explain, My interest is getting to Viewfort. My interest is my position. That's not my position, that's my interest. My position may be I want to take a car to Viewfort. But if I start the argument that I want to have a car to Viewfort and you offer me a helicopter ride, my position is the car. And I say, no, I want a car. We say, but Brian, I have a helicopter. No, I want a car. So we talk about our interests. Our interest is to get to Viewfort, and let's discuss how we do it, how we achieve. So the chamber insists on talking about our interests, and we know the interests of the business community identifies with that of the country. The country wants to see economic growth. They want to see economic development. They want to see wealth creation. They want to see people having a better quality and standard of life, social and economic. And in that kind of environment, the business community will flourish. Where people are not doing well financially and economically, businesses struggle. We believe that you must have balanced economic development, meaning all sectors need to be given equivalent support. They must have equal access to support. It may be different, but equal access. We believe that the next billionaire or millionaire from St. Lucia will come from a sector we are not even talking about, not even on our radar. So if we give all the incentives to sectors, what about these innovative, creative people coming from emerging, unseen sectors? We believe support, incentives, and concessions must be given based on output and results. Job creation, foreign exchange earnings, use of renewable energy, of technology, climate-friendly operation styles, environmental consistent operation styles, linkages to the economy. Not decide that we give to a sector. No, behaviors. Now, to always articulate that and advance that, you can imagine the debate and argument that a board will have. You can imagine how challenging it is to quickly make up your mind or take a decision on the plethora of issues that arise. So that is why we engage our members, so that members understand what the interests are. And if they're not familiar, we will do educational things, information dissemination things, so that they're understanding and appreciation of what their real interests are. So we have to do that. And we have to inquire. That's why the business performance surveys are important. And you'll say, oh, Brian, there's nothing out of it. During COVID, where we had over 60% responses to our business performance survey, what did we find out? That small and micro businesses were being disproportionately affected by COVID. That is where the issue of the micro and medium grants came from. When the chamber, we had a meeting with the government and public sector officials, and we made that statement. And the Ministry of Commerce pledged to look into it and come back with something. So that was one of the things that emerged. And also the grants of cleaning and protective equipment and material, because the cost to small business was twice that to medium and large businesses. So that information feeds into our advocacy, feeds into our discussion, and I argue we are more credible because of that information. The whole issue of skills, shortage of skills, unavailability of skills, came from that business performance survey, and we were able to take it to the government, and the government said, oh, you know, we were hearing about that too. So we substantiated that. And so it is, the work we do is important, and it is not as simple as it looks. We do take time to try to do it well. And we need your support, and we thank you for your support. But in all of that, we have to engage with the public sector. And it is so good when you know you could count on your public sector agencies to engage and to give you a bit of latitude to criticize, condemn. And I want to thank the Ministry of Commerce for allowing me to work with them and give them trouble a lot of the time. But also I want to thank the Ministry of Finance for supporting our efforts and seeing the value in the work we're trying to do, and for being here today, even after last year. You know, it reminded me on my wedding day when I had to thank my mother-in-law for allowing me to see her daughter when she didn't know what my intention was. But then I thanked her even more for allowing me to see her when she found out what my intention was. So I feel the same way. So after last year, they didn't know what it was going to be like, but they came, and this year, knowing what it is like, they're back here. So I want to thank them for the efforts, for the information, and they had to prepare. They have a lot in their program, and for giving us that information and engaging with us, answering questions, and giving further insight. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for giving me your morning today to be with us, to participate, so getting so involved in the discussion, asking so many questions, and making valuable inputs and contributions. It is really my distinct pleasure to serve you, and I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to Camille and Raquel. Camille is our Membership Development Officer. Raquel, she claims to be shy. So yes, I'm sure, if I called her, she probably would not come into the room. But since the president has summoned her, Raquel is our new program officer. I want to thank them for putting up with me, my editing and redrafting and changing, and really giving them a tough time, making it challenging. But they have done well, and they are working with us. And I want to thank them for their support, and I want to thank you, the members, for coming out. I want to thank our invited guests for joining us, and those who are not members of the chamber but are in the business community. The membership form is right there, and we'll give you a discount if you sign up now. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and please have a good rest of the day. I thank you.